everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. Got Daniele Bolelli back again here today. Of course, the historian slash author slash podcaster. And we're going to talk about the relatively new shows House of the Dragon and Lord of the Rings of Power, and how we've been talking basically a little bit about how the Rings of Power show kind of sucks and the House of the Dragon show is awesome by comparison, at least. So you wanna start off there by just basically just saying your general thoughts about each of the shows.
Sure. Rings of Power, man. It's just recently, like in the last 2 weeks, as I started playing just for fun with those chat AI programs that can write anything for you. And you give them some, and the results are usually absolutely awful and hilarious. They are funny how bad they are. I mean, it's actually funny. Songs, they don't do so bad. The poems, they are semi all right. The stories are downright atrocious, right? It's like somebody tells you mix this element, this element, this element, and at an extremely elementary school level, somebody puts it together in a storyline. I think I finally understood how Rings of Power was written because it's that's what it feels like. It feels like,
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of anti Rings of Power vibe before it even came on that I disagreed on because it was a bunch of people who were like, what? They don't have all white people? Screw that. It's all
Yeah.
white people. What? They have, there was this very anti politically correct, but done in a way that was even dumber than the political correctness kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that one
Yeah,
was
those anti SJWs can get just as annoying as the SJWs sometimes.
easy, easy. So it was one of those where it was like, come on, man, maybe a fantastic show. Let's check it out. Let's see what's going on. The visuals were clearly amazing already in the preview. So I'm like, maybe it comes out great. People have been bitching before the movies came out, and even after the movies came out, there were a lot of people who hated the movies because they were Tolkien loyalists, and they were like, unless you do page by page exactly like Tolkien envisioned it, and to me, at the cost of sounding blasphemous, but I mean, I loved the books as a kid. I read The Hobbit, I read The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, all of that, and I had a blast. But then when I saw the Peter Jackson version, I was like, he's better. As much as I like Tolkien, I find Peter Jackson a better storyteller, a better in character development, and I found he did a fantastic job. You know? So I had high
Yeah.
hopes. Like, no, I don't mind if
Yeah.
you change things or anything. And I mean, how can you screw up Lord of the Rings? It's a fantastic universe. If you are a halfway decent storyteller, you're gonna, it's a slam dunk. And I saw the first episode and I was like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah,
You
yeah. Yeah. I
powerful.
had similar thoughts like I I watched the movies before I read the books, and then I read the books, and I didn't like them as much at first, but I like them more and more every time I reread them. And yeah, I agree the Peter Jackson movies are even better. I mean,
Yep.
they stick pretty closely to the books, but like they only make minor changes, and some of those changes are better, like making Aragorn a more fleshed out character with more of an arc, for example. And
Yep.
yeah, I had similar thoughts to the first episode. I watched the first one. I was like, man, this is boring. What's going on? I hope it gets better.
And then episode two was just as bad, if not worse. And then, it picked up maybe 10 to 20% in the following episodes. But considering how bad the first two were, 10 to 20% is really not much.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and I
for
was
sure.
watching some of the movies recently. And so I rewatched like the first Lord of the Rings, and there are scenes where, for example, like at toward the end when there's like Gimli, Aragorn, and Legolas, they have sort of this sweet moment where they promise that they are not gonna abandon the hobbits, and they are and and the way Peter Jackson wrote it, the music, the writing, everything comes across as sweet and endearing. There
Yeah,
few scenes in Rings of Power where clearly they are trying to copy the same scene, where they're trying to create the same vibe, and it comes across cheesy as hell, just like, just like I felt like taking a shower listening because it was so poorly done that I'm like, I know what you're
Yeah,
going for, and what you're going for is a good idea, but fuck, learn how to write. This is so bad.
yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah, you and I were talking about that, and you sent me an article about how the a lot of the problems are probably due to bad writing.
yeah,
And yeah, that definitely makes sense. Like in some of the examples you were talking about there, I was noticing, especially in the earlier episodes, it's like they were trying to write like Tolkien, but it seemed obvious that they were just trying and didn't actually succeed in sounding like Tolkien.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, stuff like that is you're either a good storyteller or you're not. You're either a good writer or you're not. You cannot like committee your way through how to create a moving scene 101. It's like, if you don't have it, you're not gonna get it done. And so I was blown away with all the money that they put in it. And you can see the money. The visuals are great. There's no argument about the visuals. But like, Jesus Christ, how many good, not forget how many great screenwriters, maybe not that many, but how many really good screenwriters are out there? There's a lot. You couldn't find one guy who could tell a halfway decent story. Jesus, what's wrong?
Yeah,
No?
it's hard to know too. There sometimes when adaptations or movies are bad, it's because there, too many cooks in the kitchen,
Sure.
too many people trying to get their voices in. Maybe the writers were suppressed by the producers a lot. Sometimes that happens,
Could
but
be.
it seems also like maybe there were writers who all thought, "Oh, these are awesome ideas," and then they went through a whole bunch of other people and they thought, "Oh, these are really awesome ideas too. There's no way that anyone will have a problem with this," and they're like, I just find it confusing that all of this stuff got through the editing process and no one thought, man, this is going to really piss off fans and be boring and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, basics, really basics of how you of writing. If you write characters need to grip you. People need to care about the characters. In this show, there's not a character that you care about, not even vaguely. You know what I mean? Is like they are all like either really dumb or kind of whiny, or just there's nothing to draw me in. And there's something
Yeah.
that told me like that really the writing is the problem. There was a scene at one point in episode 3 or 4 when they are the darker skinned elf and this kid are running through the forest,
Oh,
escaping.
Aronder and Theo.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And they are running through the forest and they are getting chased by the orcs. And it's a fantastic scene, right? It's so good. Like the visual of it, the pacing, the way it's shot, it's beautiful. And I was like, you see, there are some great stuff. And then I realized, yeah, it's great stuff because there was not a single word spoken in the whole scene.
Yeah, exactly.
Purely action and visuals with no storyline whatsoever other than you guys are getting chased by orcs in a forest. And and so clearly cinematically the people who shot it, the director said they could do a fantastic job. They just were handed a screenplay that was written by a 6-year-old kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and in terms of the characters too, I liked the actor who played Galadriel. I liked her performance. I
Sure.
thought her performance was good, but still like a lot of the aspects of the character herself were kind of annoying. Like she was all entitled and acting like she was better than everyone else. And then, the I I was telling you I like some of the finale with the reveal that Halbrand is Sauron and stuff, but then it didn't make sense to me because Galadriel was checking those records earlier that convinced her that Halbrand like was in the lineage of the old kings, and apparently, and then when she checked the elven records closer towards the end of the season, that's when she found it out, even though she says that with the Elven records, they're less much less detailed than the records that they have on humans that she was looking at in Numenor. So you would think that she would have figured that out way earlier, and it makes her character seems dumber than she should actually be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's nothing about the characters they end up liking precisely for the reason. They either come across
Yeah.
as needlessly angry or whiny or really dumb or I mean, even think about like how Peter Jackson wrote The Hobbits. The Hobbits in the Hobbit trilogy and Lord of the Rings trilogy, they're awesome. They are hilarious. They are funny. There's something cool about the Shire. The world that they create is beautiful. So with the Harfoots, you have like carte blanche to make up anything you want, to make up a great origin story for the Hobbit, create a similar vibe. And every time those little bastards come on screen, you just wanna just run out of the room. It's so bad. It's so
Yeah, they're the worst part of the show. I just
they are
didn't care
really
about
awful.
them at all. And like you were saying, the way that Peter Jackson depicts the hobbits in the movies is so much better. And it's like you could tell they were going for similar vibes with the Harfoots in the show, but they just came off as like cringy and annoying, and I really didn't care about them.
Yep, yeah, and that's exactly what it feels like, right? They study the source material, but it's really like the chat box thing, like where somebody took make cute small creatures, put that in there, have them have a funny dialogue and run away from danger, throw that in there. But you need to know how to do it. You know, the elements are not wrong, but you need to know how to write, and that's
Yeah,
clearly not what's happening with this one.
yeah, definitely. Also, with the stuff you were talking about in terms of like the woke shit and people were complaining about there being characters with different races, we were talking about that too, and like that's one of the few aspects of the show that was not done badly in my opinion. Like they didn't just it seemed clear to me that they didn't just throw in black characters and just
Sure.
always highlight all the time, I'm black, I'm oppressed, I'm better than the white characters. Like the
Right.
characters who were black, they just seemed like they were natural characters and their race was never
But
mentioned. And you know, it there's nothing wrong with having characters of different races in
yeah,
Lord of the Rings. And I mean, people say that Tolkien would have a huge problem with that, but I don't really think he would, to be honest. I mean, he was all about the promotion of the underdog, and even the suppressed underdog can be the hero and stuff like that. You could see a Hobbit as the Hobbits as a representation of black people or something like that in that way. I mean, and the yeah, I mean, I just didn't really have a problem with that aspect of the show.
me neither. That I didn't care for it or against it. You know what I mean? To me, it's like the fact that people even pay attention to that tells me more about the people than about the material. It's like, who
Yeah,
cares? How does that make any difference? Okay, if anything, you know, I agree on the notion, you know, if you take a character that's clearly well described, you know, if you make Galadriel black, it's like,
yeah,
okay, that's
yeah,
going against everything the way Tolkien described the character. But if you take any other character that you're making up and throw in a black elf or Asian, whatever, why is that a problem? If anything, yeah, maybe not telling a story that's like every single person needs to be super light skinned. What's wrong with that? You know, I don't have a problem with that at all.
hmm yeah. And in terms of Lord of the Rings versus House of the Dragon, though, I thought it was interesting that even people who hated that like hated Rings of Power overall, but also were talking about how it's all woke for changing the races of characters and stuff, even some of those people liked House of the Dragon because you could argue that that aspect of the show was done even more well perhaps than it was in Rings of Power. Like they made the Valyrians black, whereas that was never mentioned in the Fire and Blood book. And George R.R. Martin himself doesn't have a problem with that, and he was involved with the creation of the show. And I mean, maybe that seemed more organic or something like that. either way. But I think it's more, the difference is more down to, like you said, the difference in writing. Like House of the Dragon was just much more of a well-written show.
Absolutely. And I think that's the huge difference, because in terms of visuals they are equally well done, in terms of the way it's shot, in terms of the cinematography and all of that, equally well done. But also, again, I have no idea who these people are, so I have no personal stake in it. But like whoever wrote House of the Dragon actually knows how to write characters and tell a story, and whoever did the Rings of Power does not. And so it's just now, if you want to look at House of the Dragon, there are issues with the story there as well. Not so much with the story, but like, how can I phrase it? My main issue with House of the Dragon, it's a really well shot show. It's well written. It has some good dialogue, not as good as Game of Thrones, where you literally, I would pause some of the shows to write down some of the lines because they were that memorable. But it's still well written. It's good. The main issue is that Game of Thrones was dark as hell in terms of the vibe of it all. But you did have characters that you rooted for. You did have characters that you love, that you care for. You want them to succeed. House of the Dragon, rather quickly, you stop caring about anybody because they are all awful, awful, awful people. Like the only one who's halfway likable, that in fact there's a feel good about it, is there's that
The king, Viserys.
well, he fucks up so much. I mean, you feel like poor guy. He's a good guy, but he screws up at every step of the way. So you're like, how can you be this dumb? But no, there's like the one that she marries in it at the beginning, one of the Valerian, who's he's
Old,
gay, so they have to
yeah,
take this marriage where it's really just a marriage of pretense because he has his homosexual lovers, and then they make him disappear and sail off into the sunset with his lover. That one was cool, because you do care about him. You're like, oh, poor guy. He seemed like a nice enough guy. He is
yeah.
trying his best to be.
And he was really, really supportive of
Yeah,
Rhaenyra too, in spite of their, like, him being secretly gay and stuff. He was actually a really good husband in spite of that.
totally. So he was a sweet guy. So I appreciated that they got him out in giving him a good storyline, which is different from the books, by the way, where they kill him horribly and the whole thing goes to shit. So I thought they improved on the books. But then, other than that, everyone involved in that story, you're just waiting for. You're just waiting to see who kills them because you don't care. There's
Yeah,
no rooting for somebody or hoping that something happens. So that's the problem of House of the Dragon, is looking like, how long do you want to watch a show in which you despise every single character? Even if it's
yeah.
shot, even if it's well written, there's a point that's like, okay, why am I watching this again?
Oh,
And this
okay.
has
I
been,
don't mind that, actually. I don't really mind not having that many like morally redeemable characters. I just think it's interesting. Like, I guess the main conflict is between Alicent and Rhaenyra. I just find it interesting that, I guess I find the character development to be interesting because they both start out more innocent, and then they get more morally gray, and then they get more corruptible. So I guess it's more the character development that I appreciate about that.
yeah. And in fact, I did watch the show and I did enjoy it. So it's not like it's terrible for me to go from, sure, I'll watch it, why not? It's a pretty good show, to actually going, damn, I love this show. I need characters that draw me in. I need and they don't have to be, I'm not asking for perfect, all good. I love anti-heroes, but still there has to be a heroic part in the anti-hero. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like in this one,
And
doesn't feel like that.
I think that's interesting too, because in terms of the characters, even though pretty much none of the characters are likable in House of the Dragon, they're just so much better written
Yeah,
that it's more of a compelling show because you care about what happens to the characters, even though there are much more morally good characters in Rings of Power, but the writing is so bad that you just don't care.
Totally. In fact, that's what I mean. It's like I don't care about morally good in a traditional sense. I care about epic enough that you make me like you, warts and all. You don't have to be all perfectly clean. I mean, even if you look at a lot of the Game of Thrones characters, they had their dark sides. They had some serious dark sides, but they were fantastic nonetheless. You do care about Tyrion or Arya or some of them, and then they do some stuff once in a while. They are like, holy shit, that was a little, but you like them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, I'm not preaching a goody goody kind of characters that are just flat, but I need something epic in that sense. And I mean, there's a tiny bit like, what's that? I forget the names of all these guys, but like the uncle in the
Viserys, or do you mean Daemon?
Damon.
Okay.
He, there are some scenes of his that are awesome, where you go like, okay, I kind of like this. He's clearly a bad guy in some way, but also likable to some degree.
Yeah.
And
I think
they,
he's actually my favorite character on the
oh,
show.
totally
Yeah.
easy. And they upped his epic qualities more and built 2 or 3 more characters along similar lines. Okay, now we're talking. Now it's a fantastic show.
Yeah.
My main issue is just, yeah, I don't care for most of the people who show up on the screen. Yeah, I kind of look at them and go like, wow, that's an awful human being. And another one comes on and like, wow, that's an awful human being. And that to me makes for more difficult storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they kind of pulled it off. It pulled it off in spite of that. I mean, like, yeah, I have some complaints about the show too, but yeah, the execution of it was just so much better. And yeah, I mean, like in terms of Rings of Power, I guess the only characters I really am interested in terms of, well, like, I want to see what happens with them,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll probably watch. I'll probably try watching season 2 just to see what happens with them, because I want to see more of what happens with Sauron and Adar, who is that half elf
Yeah,
father of the orcs.
yeah,
Those are kind of the only characters I care about going forward. Like, I don't even really care that much about Gandalf, even
right.
though like I like him as a character, just because Nori's gonna be that Harfoot is gonna be with him, and that's just
Yeah.
gonna be fucking
Oh,
annoying.
absolutely. Yeah, that's unstomachable. No, it's I mean, it's one of those that I end up like a lot, like the last episode or 2 of that series, I watching fast forward pretty much the whole time. I was like, okay, I heard this. Oh, this is a terrible line. Like, what happens next? And I watch it in half of the time because I was like, I'm curious enough to see where they do with it, but each time keeps going like, man, this is terrible. And I think there's a tendency there. Yeah, I think you nailed it. Like they did not do it in House of the Dragon. Sorry, they did not do it in Rings of Power, where they try to have the characters being the good characters, except they come across as cheesy and flat. The tendency instead of House of the Dragon of making everybody shitty is there has been this tendency, which started out in an interesting way. Because if you go back to 30 years ago, of course there were anti-heroes, but the
Yeah,
prevailing
we
vibe,
we've talked about one of the best ones before, Conan, right?
oh yeah, of course. And so it's not like it's a new thing, but the tendency was you still more movies than not, you had your clean cut, great hero who's all good and wonderful and all that stuff. Then they started pushing for the anti-hero direction, and I thought it was great, where they make more morally ambiguous characters that are powerful. And then it started being less and less morally ambiguous and just being shitty, where there's no
Yeah.
more ambiguity. They're just bad people, flat out. And that's
Mm-hmm.
where I lose interest, where I'm like, that's not that interesting to me at that point. It's like if you show me, I don't know, the Punisher, you know, he's epic, he's fantastic, he's dark as hell, he's bloody as you could, but there's some power to the character that you care about. So that to me is a great anti-hero. When it becomes that the shitty qualities are overpowering the good one to the point that it again is not even about ambiguity anymore, it's just about terrible people, I don't really want to spend my time watching that.
Yeah, I can see that. Like and it can just become like torture porn or something like that too. Like this isn't exactly the same type of thing, but I was just thinking about the Saw movies, for example, not in terms of the characters, but just in terms of bad things happening, and slasher movies can just turn into like torture porn.
Yep.
That's why I checked out for the last few, at least the last three or so of those movies, because I was like, I think I've seen enough different ways that people can get mutilated
Right.
because this guy wants to fuck with people because he got cancer.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So yeah, I'm with you there. To me, it's like, I mean, it's an old age-old thing, but like characters need to draw you in. You need to
Hmm.
identify. You need to care. You need to be emotionally involved. Maybe not every
Hmm.
single story, but close to. Otherwise, why? Every time you sit in to watch something, you're trading your time for that thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
You need
Yeah,
to.
and in like in terms of the a lot of the characters on Games of Thrones, like I guess some of the well, the Stark family become gradually like kind of the main characters and kind of the more morally redeemable ones for the most part. And you can see like especially later in the series with Jon Snow rather, and Sansa Stark and Arya Stark in particular, they're doing worse and worse things morally, but you still can kind of understand where they're coming from and feel empathy towards them because they're doing these worst things, but they've had to learn to adapt to doing worse things in order to survive. And you
Yep,
still, like I said, you still root for them, especially like Jon Snow, because he's probably the most more morally redeemable, except, well, along with maybe Samuel Tarly or a few others like
sure.
that. But it's not just like you were saying earlier. It's not just it doesn't just become bad people doing bad things endlessly, and yeah,
Yep.
that can get just as boring as like this completely unbelievably flawless good guy hero who never does anything bad and is morally unflappable and that sort of thing.
Yep, exactly. And I think that's the like it's becoming a stereotype. It's the same way as Game of Thrones has created it has become a stereotype that you have to kill half of the characters people like. And it's like,
Hmm.
oh man, it's like one character once in a while adds some shock and drama to it all. If you keep killing good characters at every other show, it's not even a surprise anymore. It's just like you make me check out because you want to invest. It's kind of the problem where like The Walking Dead went to shit, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You
Yeah, I
cannot
agree. Yeah, like
everybody.
that show was really good at
Yeah,
first. Like the first, even maybe the first I don't know, like 4 or 5 seasons or
yep,
so, and then it just got so repetitive and like you were saying, just basically to the point of, bad shit's happening to everyone and everyone basically turns into a bad guy to survive this terrible world. And then I checked out on the show when it started alternating between being even more disturbing than I can handle, and I can handle some disturbing
yeah,
shit, but I check out at some point, and it seemed to me like it started alternating between being way too disturbing and then being like some sort of after school special thing, which
yeah.
seemed made no sense to me.
Yeah, and again, it seems like it's a formula, right? We learned, oh, people went crazy when in Game of Thrones they started killing sympathetic characters. So, you know what? We're going to kill a sympathetic character every 2 episodes. We'll beat them. That they killed it every 6 episodes. We'll do it. And it's like, no, man, you killed the build up. You kill also because nobody wants to invest in it anymore emotionally. Because if you kill one character once in a while, is a shock. If you kill everybody, after a while, it's like, well, why am I watching these ones when I know they are all going to end up horribly anyway? It's kind of like,
Yeah, yeah. And it can get to the point in a show too where you think, "Oh, I can tell this character is going to die soon." Just a matter of time and a matter of who's going to kill them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Which again is doesn't interest me storytelling wise. So I just, yeah, I think like that tendency has gone way too far, way too quick, and it needs some rebalancing a little bit to make it interesting again.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, so what would you give what would you give for like a rating out of 10 for Rings of Power in comparison to House of the Dragon?
I mean, Rings of Power, you got to give it something for cinematography, but the writing is so bad that I'm like, I don't know, it's a 2, a 3, something like that out
Oh,
of.
okay.
And then, House of the Dragon is a good enough show. It's watchable, so it's in the 6 to 7 range.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. I
Neither.
think I'd give the, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, go, go.
Uh, I think I'd probably give I think I'd give them both of them slightly higher ratings. I think I'd give Rings of Power probably 5 out of 10, kind of
Right.
barely passable to me, but not even really, definitely not a show that I would want to force myself to go through again.
Hmm.
But and I'd give House of the Dragon like I don't know, like maybe a 7.5 or an 8 out of 10. I agree. So far, it's not as good as Game of Thrones overall, but that's an interesting aspect about the way both of these adaptations turned out too, because the expectation, at least at first, seemed to be that Rings of Power was going to be good and House of the Dragon was probably going to be bad because there was the infamously bungled and rushed ending of season 8 of Game of Thrones. But in my opinion, and it sounds like you have a similar opinion, the show still overall was great. And so I was pleasantly surprised that House of the Dragon turned out to be pretty good. And that the Rings of Power show turned out to be just bad. And like you were saying earlier, people were just assuming that it was going to be bad at first. So I kept saying like, man, I know people are skeptical, but I really hope it's going to be good. And I want it to be good. And you can't judge a show before it comes out. So yeah, I was surprised that to me, House of the Dragon ended up being good and the Rings of Power show ended up being bad.
Yeah, I mean, everybody in my household, and they all love Lord of the Rings. They watch 2 episodes of Rings of Power and they quit. I'm the only one who actually finished it. And I finished it purely because I had to, kind of thing. I'm just curious to see where it's going and not because.
Yeah, yeah. I honestly, yeah, I was gonna bail after like episode 2 or 3, but I kept watching the show because it seemed like it occasionally got slightly better, and I wanted to talk about it with my fantasy nerd friends because my friends Dusty and Tristram, I talked with them about every episode,
Yeah.
and they're not like huge fans of the show or anything, but they like it a little bit more than me. So it was fun to talk about those aspects and just also the like some of the ways that the show butchered the lore too.
Yeah.
That was disappointing to me. Like for example, the that whole all that shit with Mithril and making it that the Mithril contains the light of the Valinor, so the elves have to get all this Mithril for the dwarves, otherwise they won't be immortal anymore, so they have to go back to Valinor. That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I mean, Mithril is this awesome, rare, powerful material. You can have it that way without adding that it has this like magic powers, and there are other just weird aspects of the show in terms of that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I really didn't find that they didn't hit anything out of the park, And I think that was the. Whereas again, House of the Dragon may not be my favorite show ever, but I'll be like, it's a good show. It's well done. If it comes on, I'll watch it, kind of thing, and I'll be cool with it. The Rings of Power, I think it's disappointing the fact that it's such good source material, it's such good previous adaptations. You have everything set up for you to do a great job, and it feels like they didn't even try. And I think that's the vibe. And it happens, sometimes it happens to good writers, but usually not an entire show. Like the guys who wrote Game of Thrones, they did a great job for a lot of the time. And then the last 2 or 3 episodes was like, what the hell happened? It's like you just forget everything you wrote previously, kind of thing. Because how can you be the same person writing this crap compared to what? Because it doesn't make any sense in terms of characters arc or things like that. But yeah, that's kind of the vibe of where I'm at. I think you shut off your mic.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was muted.
Yeah.
Yeah. I only relatively recently, in the past year or so, caught up on the show because I had read all the books, but I hadn't watched all the show. So I knew I didn't spoil anything for myself, but I knew that everyone thought that season 8 was fumbled.
Right.
So I watched it, and then I kept saying up until about that same point, like the last 3 episodes or so, I thought, man, this is actually really good so far. I don't know why people don't like it. And then I realized, oh, there are only there are only 3 episodes left, and
Yeah.
then they just started rushing shit. I'm like, why do you have like all of this stuff happening in one season? Like the fight with the White Walkers,
Yeah.
and then the contesting for the throne, and having this power struggle between Jon Snow and Daenerys, and then all of this shit happening, and then them figuring out that Bran is ruling after that. Like they did all of that shit in one season. That could have been 3 seasons or at least 2 seasons.
Easy. Easy. And that part I get it. Sometimes they tell you, these guys had the Star Wars contract or whatever it is, they wanted to move on, so they wanted to wrap up. I get it. But you can still do a rushed kind of thing that's good. Like for example, when they did the HBO Rome TV series, the first season was fantastic. Then they were planning to do 5 seasons, and then at the beginning of season 2, they told them this is the last one. So they were like, shit. So they tried to rush the storyline really fast. They still did a great job. Season 2 of Rome is still awesome. So to me, the main problem was it a rush season 8? Sure, but it could have still worked. The main problem was that they stopped making sense. It's like when you take like the entire Arya Stark story arc, built on revenge, and she's willing to do anything for revenge. And they gave her fantastic moments previously. And then you take her to the place where she's this close to Cersei, and she has been living for this moment the entire time. And the Hound goes like, "Oh wait, this is really dangerous. You may die." And she goes like, "Yeah, you're right. I'm out of here. See you. Have a good day." What in the actual fuck? That has nothing to do with anything you've built up until that point.
Yeah, definitely.
So that was the main problem, that they just they bailed on making any justice to the characters the way they built them for 8 seasons previously. And
Hmm.
we are like, or even even the way they did the Daenerys thing, it was just like, give some kind of a logical moral conundrum for why she does it. She seemed just like a crazy bitch all of a sudden. She's
Yeah, exactly. Like she's all like fucking genocidal all of a sudden. There was like there was no gradual arc or moral questioning or anything that led to that point.
if it was like they set it up that like Cersei is escaping, the only way to get her is you have to kill a bunch of innocents. Okay, now there's a moral choice, disturbing, but fine. They made it completely like she didn't need to do all that. And she decided, you know what? I woke up this morning. I'm just gonna kill a bunch of people because that's I've lived on protecting the innocents for 7.5 seasons, but I'm tired of that shit. Now I'm just gonna kill them all instead.
Yeah. And like what they did with Jon Snow was a little disappointing too. Like so he ends up killing Daenerys because she just randomly becomes genocidal, and then apparently, so like he gets imprisoned because some people want to kill him, and some people think he should be the new ruler, and he just ends up right back where he started, basically at the beginning of the show in the Night's Watch.
Yeah,
Like, well,
yeah.
what was the point of that? I mean, I understand why some of the Unsullied, for example, would be pissed off that Jon Snow is the ruler, but it seemed like it just made the most sense to me organically in terms of the story and in terms of how many people supported Jon Snow, that he would be the new ruler. I mean, it is cool that Bran ends up being the new ruler, but it just didn't make sense to me that Jon Snow ends up right where he started at the very start of the series.
Yeah, and it's funny because again, if you look at what Game of Thrones had done until that point, they were awesome, disturbing for my taste, going a little too much into the blood and gore and let's kill all sort of sympathetic characters, but super well done. And there were so many lines that were like from a writing standpoint, I can't even tell you how many times I paused the shows and I went down to quote, like write it down in a file of book Game of Thrones quotes because they were that good, perfect writing. And so they clearly did a fantastic job, and then they blew the ending. These days, when I look at, I don't know if I in completely different genres. If I watch Reservation Dogs, for the most part, is super well written and it's funny and it's moving and it's cool. You want a more traditional story? I actually like the Punisher TV series. I thought it was really well done,
Me
fantastic
too. Me too.
character, build it up beautifully. Even I don't know if you saw Reacher. Reacher is much more. It's a much simpler story, but it's
I
also
haven't seen it yet, but I'm aware of it. My dad's read a lot of the books. I know.
it's well done. It's well done. It's a cool. So there is really good writing out there, just not in Rings of Power.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's just oh, and another thing, it's kind of a minor thing, but in terms of the lore in Rings of Power uh that I thought was just bad was, so at this point in the history of Middle Earth in the show, Galadriel is supposed to already be married to Celeborn, and she's supposed to have kids with him. And people don't even have to be aware of the lore to. They just have to have seen the Fellowship of the Ring to know that Galadriel is married to Celeborn, uh, and he's supposed to be already at this point, and they're supposed to have kids. And then to me, they made it really clear. I think it was in episode 7 that she said something to the effect of like she said he went off to war and she never saw him again. And then Theo asked her, "So he's dead?" And she says yes. So people disagree about whether that means he's supposed to actually be dead or not. So there's perhaps a possibility that he'll come back. But if they're doing just this red herring thing and having him come back, then I don't see, like, that just annoys me. I would have preferred them just leaving him out of the show entirely
Yeah,
in instead of doing that. It's especially that's one of the aspects of the show that bothers me too, is that they just kept overusing the red herring technique over and over and over again. It got so annoying.
yeah,
Like an example of that is at the end of episode 6, I think it was, when the that's it. Just the ending of that episode entirely annoyed me, where that guy who is loyal to Adar, he takes that shard of a blade that's somehow
yeah, yeah,
magical and connected to Sauron, and he puts it in like this key sort of mechanism, and it lets all this water out, which somehow causes a massive amount of water to cause a volcano to overflow,
yeah.
which doesn't make any sense at all to me how that could happen. And then they ended it with this super obvious red herring where Galadriel is just staring at an erupting volcano and a giant wave of lava coming towards her. And they end the episode that way, as if to say, "Ooh, Galadriel, is she going to survive?" Where anyone who's even seen the Lord of the Rings movie again knows she's definitely gonna fucking survive.
Of
So
course,
what
of
the hell's
course.
the point of that?
Yeah, it's odd to say the least. It really, really is odd. Because I'm not like if some random college student gives me that as a project, I would go like, Jesus, man, you're really bad. But like if somebody who's hired to write for $1 billion series does that, it's like, weren't there 22 steps before that? You know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Were there other aspects of the lore that you noticed that they kind of ruined in the show?
I think I was so turned off by everything that I stopped paying attention about every detail, because I was just like, give me a good story and I'll start caring about the details. But without a good story, why am I even bothering with the details? Because it's like, it's just, I mean, I don't know. That's like even in actually that's the only thing that I found that Tolkien did better than Peter Jackson in the original. Like in the books, the character of Elrond is awesome. He's like one of the best characters in the whole thing. In the movies, he's okay at best. He's like, he's all right. He's not. And then in the TV series, he just sucks. And
Yeah, yeah. I was disappointed by Elrond too, and yeah, like I said, I guess the only characters that I at least wanted to know what happened with them were Galadriel and Halbrand, who turned out to be Sauron, and Adar, and the character who really obviously turned out to be Gandalf. Those are the characters where I cared where the plot was going for them. And yeah, like I said, I did like the reveal of Halbrand rather as being Sauron in episode 8, but like I was saying before, just the way that was executed was just, it just didn't make sense, and it contradicted the a whole bunch of the entire season so far. So it was a little disappointing in that way too.
yeah, yeah. At best, the things didn't make sense, and at worst, you do get what they are doing, and you're like, no, So it's missed opportunity, which sucks because you're putting $1 billion into a show. You better come out as and not just any show, like some legacy show like Lord of the Rings, where people love the books, lots of people love the movies, all of that, and to blow it that, if it's not up to par, okay, those things are masterpieces, so I get it that maybe you're not quite at that level, but not, there's a gap there between like being a 9.9 the way the Lord of the Rings movies are, and being a 2 like the show is. It's like you could have been a 7 and we would have been okay. It's like, it's it is what it is.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit more. You were talking about some of the issues you had with the House of the Dragon show. I mean, obviously it's way better than Rings of Power, but I agree it's not as good as Game of Thrones. So what you were talking a little bit before about what you think made Game of Thrones better than House of the Dragon. And you were saying one of those aspects was the characters, that you care about some of the characters more
Yeah.
in Game of Thrones. And you said you don't really like none of like you were saying basically that you can't really empathize with any of the characters in House of the Dragon. And what did you think in terms of the plot too? Because I know I like the season finale, but I know some people thought that was a little bit fumbled too.
I mean, plot seemed all right, seemed dumb but again, most human beings are that way, in the sense that so many of the problems they run into could have been solved by talking to each other in fairly easy fashion, and they don't. And
Yeah,
that sense is like, how can they be this dumb? But then you look throughout history how people have handled similar situation, and they seem to unfailingly handle them the same way. So you're like, okay, it's dumb, but not unrealistically dumb. It's just how a lot of people actually behave like. Which again, if I want reality, I look out the window. I don't need to get a TV show to. Like, to me, and this is my particular thing, okay? I'm not expecting everybody to feel the same way. But to me, when I'm watching something, I want to be inspired. I want to feel like there's something epic about it. I want to feel that there's, even if you look at, for example, think about the way that they build The Sopranos. You cared about some characters that objectively are morally disturbing, but you care about them. They are well built, they intrigue you. By the time the show ends, you're like, maybe he was kind of an asshole all along. But for the most part, they made you care. They made you. The Godfather did it even way better. The Sopranos did it well, but The Godfather did it fantastically. You get Don Vito Corleone is a guy who's doing the same stuff as Tony Soprano, but you don't just kind of care for the guy. You love the guy. Like, you are rooting for him. You want him to be successful. You want the law to stay away from him. You want him to. So to me, it's kind of important that, like, if you want to build a morally complicated character, give me a Don Vito Corleone. I'll be watching every episode. You
Yeah.
need a
And
guy.
the like especially in the first Godfather movie, the development of Michael Corleone from just being estranged from his family to basically taking his father's place by the end of the movie. That's the way that character and the plot is done is brilliant too.
Yeah, whereas House of the Dragon feel like everything is, it's like watching 30 years into Michael Corleone's reign, where everybody's an asshole kind of thing. And it's just like, okay, why am I watching it again? There's that element of, like, I don't know, I don't get entertained by watching a bunch of awful people on the screen doing their thing. I'm just like, I'm entertained enough because it's well written and it's cynically beautiful, but I don't have the, like, I have to watch it because, like, I give you an example. Way back in the day, Lost. Did you ever watch Lost?
Oh yeah, yeah. I love that's another show with similarly to Game of the Thrones, I would say. I loved about 99% of that show, and then just the ending just was terrible to me.
Sure. I mean, but that was the thing that interests me to me about Lost, in the sense that in terms of plot, the first 2 or 3 seasons, even in terms of plot, were fantastic. And then it became clear that they had no idea what the hell they were doing and they were making shit up. And nobody understood a thing that happened after season 4. And it was all really damn weird, right? But you didn't care about it, in the sense that I was so invested in the characters. The characters were so damn fantastic in their own ways, and they all had some serious shadows, but you build characters that, if you had those characters doing dishes for 12 seasons, I would have watched it.
Yeah, yeah, for
Point
sure.
where I could not care less about the plot anymore. I was like, well, it would be nice to actually have a plot that makes sense, but if we don't, that's fine, just the same, because the characters are so good.
Hmm.
And I think that's a lesson that a lot of these shows seem to forget, in that characters are kind of important. They are one of the primary reasons why we watch stuff. And so, unless you give me something after a while, I'm like, it's well written, it's doing its thing, but what do I care?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I thought it was well, another aspect I was just thinking of in terms of the like the woke stuff is that I think was good actually about House of the Dragon is like I was saying, basically it turned out that the two protagonists, Alicent and Rhaenyra, obviously they're women, and I care just I care just about them as if they were, like the stereotypical male characters. But
Yeah,
again, they didn't do that in like this cringy woke way where they were just shoving it in your face that these are oppressed women trying to get powerful in a world that was very misogynistic in comparison to today. It didn't feel like cringy or anything like that at all.
right. Yeah, that stuff. I mean, even Game of Thrones originally did it well because they had a bunch of powerful female characters. They are, so that one is, again, none of that stuff bothers me. I'm bothered by terrible writing, which is not the case in House of the Dragon. Again, House of the Dragon is well written. It's people who know how to tell a story. I don't know that they know how to create characters, but then again, also, it's not them. It's J.R.R. Martin giving them a story that's what the story is. You know what I mean? It's like, it's what he handed to them, and you're stuck with a story in which every character sucks. And then you make the best of it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think they really did. Yeah. So, yeah, were there any other particular aspects about either show that you wanted to discuss, or talk about how adaptations in general?
No, I mean, because adaptations, I think, like, yeah, the movies are a perfect example. Not only can you adapt great source material, but you can even improve on great source material. And of
Yeah,
course,
yeah.
everybody's gonna feel that same way. You're always gonna have people who are pissed because it's not like, even if you look at Conan, for example, that you mentioned earlier, the Robert E. Howard stories are fantastic. The movie, and by the movie I mean the only one worth watching, which was the 1982 movie, the original one, uh,
Arnold.
departs a lot from the way the Robert E. Howard stories are done, but captures the spirit of it all. It's still fantastic. It's different. It's clearly an adaptation, but it's awesome. So I don't mind the fact that people break from the original source material. Sometimes you have to. You need to tell a story in a different fashion. You have different sensibility. It's how you do it. And again, Milius to me knew how to do it well. Peter Jackson knew how to do it well. Um, Many other cases, not so much.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. I was thinking of another example too. One show. Well, I kind of have mixed feelings about it. The relatively recent Wheel of Time adaptation. I thought that was interesting because I'm a big fan of the books, and
Mhm.
I didn't like some of the changes, but some of the changes actually made sense too. Uh, for example, like there's there's supposed to be this thing where you can only characters who can see the weaves which are connected to the magic system. The only characters who can see those are the characters who can use the weaves or the magic system themselves. So if you depicted that in the show, it would sometimes look like, if you're viewing it from the perspective of someone who doesn't have magic powers and you see two people with magic powers battling each other, it would just kind of look silly because it would look like people moving their arms around and moving in weird ways and stuff, and it would look like they were playing pretend or something like that. So they made it so one change that they made is that everyone can see the weaves, which makes sense, and they made some changes like that that make sense. And then, like you were saying too, in the Lord of the Rings movies, some of the changes they were actually improvements too.
Definitely. So it's possible. It's again, at the end of the day, it boils down to, you can have all the special effects you want, you can do but there's no substitute for good storytelling, good writing, good character development.
Yeah,
Those are skills
exactly.
that are the foundation of it all. Without that stuff, you don't have a show, or you don't get.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. They're always uber fans of the original source material who have a problem if you make the slightest change. And yeah, like you were saying there, what really matters is whether the story is good and whether the characters are good. If you do that and you make changes, then it can be just as good or better, like you were saying.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've pretty much covered most aspects of what we were going to talk about there. So
Cool, man.
yeah, unless you can think of anything else related to this that you wanted to discuss, then we could probably end it here.
All good. I'm gonna go cook then. I have food in the oven, so it's time to start mixing it up.
Sweet, sweet. All right. Well, thanks for talking with me, man. This was fun as always. And thanks everyone for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Click that like button, share this everywhere, and click that bell to be notified when I come out with new videos. Probably this weekend, I'm going to talk with my friend Dusty about Children of Dune, which is the third book in the original Dune series by Frank Herbert. So check that out as well. And yeah, check out my Patreon page too. The link is in the description as always. And I believe I copied and pasted your links from our last chat for your podcast, History on Fire, Drunken Taoist, and all of your books too. And so check out all Daniele Bolelli's awesome stuff too. Your History on Fire podcast in particular, I think, is really awesome.
Sweet, man.
And yeah, you're welcome. And thanks and like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and grooves in the heart. And House of the Dragon is a good show. Rings of Power is not. Let us know whether you agree or disagree with us in the comments. All right. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks again, Daniele. And adios until next time, everyone.